Now to introduce this evening's program. New York City and state are projected to receive $25 billion in federal money to improve infrastructure. Our speaker, Brian Fritsch, will discuss how the newly passed infrastructure bill could reshape New York. We'll keep our fingers crossed. He will tell us more about where the money will be allocated and how it will impact our city. Brian joined Regional Plan Association, that's the RPA, in 2019 to lead the organization's work on federal initiatives and partnerships, including running the Build Gateway Now and the Public for Penn coalitions. Since the pandemic, he has been working extensively on federal aid packages for the region's transportation agencies and to secure funding for capital projects. He has authored a number of reports and is a frequent spokesperson for RPA. Prior to RPA, he worked in public affairs and policies, including serving as the outreach director for New York City Pre-K for All expansion. Without further ado, let's turn this event over to Brian.
Thanks so much, Joanne. Would it be possible for me to start my video?
Yes, I guess so. Natalie?
Yeah, you have permission to share your screen and start your video. Do whatever you need.
It is not allowing me to start my video, unfortunately.
Let me see.
But I'll start sharing my screen now.
Does he have to be a host or co-host to?
No, as soon as his screen is shared, just anything that he runs will be shared with us. So, you know, the video is not something we have control over through Zoom.
Oh, it looks like something's coming up now. Okay.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. And if we can figure out the camera sharing, that's great too. And if not, no worries at all. I look like my picture anyway, so you don't really need to see my face talking. Thanks so much, Joanna. I'm really happy to be here to talk about the bipartisan infrastructure bill and how it will shape both. Well, I'm going to focus primarily on the city today because I feel like that's what people probably are most interested in. But obviously there will be impacts that stretch far beyond the city limits. Just going to give a quick intro to RPA, and then I'll talk about the bill generally. Before moving into some of the specific projects that are likely to receive federal funds and move forward. So if you're not familiar with Regional Plan Association, we're a nonprofit research planning and advocacy organization. We were founded in 1922, so we're very proud to be celebrating our centennial this year. We're going to kick that off at our annual assembly, which is our largest public event in early May. We're just, the main focus of our group is we're dedicated to improving the New York City metropolitan region, in its economic health, environmental sustainability, and quality of life. So we cover the entire New York City metro. We deal in, or we work in a number of areas across the tri-state region. Just a couple of stats there. It's 23.5 million people now as of the next most recent census. That's 782 municipalities in these borders, 3 states, 31 counties. So we do cover a wide region, and that's a part of our overall approach. We focus on 4 main issue areas. We're probably best known for our transportation work, but we do housing and neighborhood planning. We have an energy and environment program, and we oftentimes talk about governance issues because without good governance, we know that getting our other priorities done is extremely difficult, if not impossible. Over the course of our 100 years, we've put out 4 long-term plans for the entire New York City region. Our first one was in 1929, and we followed that up with one in the 60s, one in the 90s, and our most recent one, which came out in 2017. These works make a number of recommendations on how to move the entire region forward in a way that's equitable, sustainable, healthy, and inclusive. So to start, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about why the bipartisan infrastructure bill was so needed. You know, we've just hit a point, well, prior to the passage of the bill, we had hit a point where we had been investing less in infrastructure than at any time since World War II. And even during World War II, there was a huge percentage of the annual GDP that went toward infrastructure. Well, you'll see that, like, from this graph that, you know, throughout the 50s and 60s especially, we were spending close to 6% of our gross domestic product on our infrastructure, and that has declined basically annually since that point. If you look at the other international, the other countries that are sort of spending massive amounts of money on infrastructure that are large, like the US, we rank towards the bottom of infrastructure spending of all countries. I believe there are 56 countries that you can really measure national infrastructure on a year-to-year basis, and we rank 53rd in terms of our investment in infrastructure. You know, we had sank to under 2% of GDP per year in the most recent years. This New Deal, the New Deal, the bipartisan infrastructure bill will essentially double the amount that we're spending on infrastructure annually over the next 5 years. So, you know, we just are not really competitive at this point globally in terms of being able to open our markets and create the sort of economic development. Your guess is as good as mine as to whether or not that will actually pass in one way, shape, or form in Washington. So just to dive a little deeper into what is in the bill in terms of spending, the $650 million that is the big dark blue box on the left, that's reauthorized transportation funding. That is sort of like if DC had done absolutely nothing, not passed the bill, just kind of stayed with business as usual, that funding would have still existed. You know, most of that goes to roads and bridges, some to transit and other transportation priorities, but it's basically an 80-20 split between those things. That would have continued, but they added in all these other categories, which range from 110 billion down to 11 billion, which kind of are the exciting new things that we'll both be able to take advantage of through the grant programs or get directly from the federal government. And I'll cover each one of these more or less individually as I go through here. But so, you know, it's not all new funding. It's about half and half, not quite. But it's a big investment in our infrastructure. All right. So now just looking at what New York State specifically will receive of that funding. There's about $11.6 billion in the bill for New York State for highways. There are 5 main projects around the city that are likely to be advanced as a result of this funding. On the picture on the right, you see is the first bullet there. It's the triple cantilever of the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. I think probably most of you are familiar with this part of the BQE. If the picture went further to the right, you'd see Brooklyn Bridge Park. Up on top is the Brooklyn Heights Promenade. This part of the BQE is crumbling and currently undergoing some extensive repair work to extend its life for 20 years. Mayor de Blasio, in the last couple months of his administration, decided this is what he was going to do, extend the life of the project for 20 years, and sort of give this part of the BQE enough time for major change. There's been talk of tunneling this part of the expressway, ripping it down completely, doing a number of different things. But right now we have kind of a 20-year window to decide if we're going to make a major change to that part of the BQE. Another exciting project is capping portions of the Cross Bronx Expressway. The Cross Bronx really sort of ripped up a number of residential neighborhoods when it was built a half century ago, or even older than that. There's talk of building over the top and putting in parkland. So a really exciting project that Senator Schumer and Representative Richie Torres have really championed recently. That can see funding, just because it's 4 highways doesn't mean it needs to be for building more highways. It definitely will go to a lot towards maintenance and some smaller changes. But the idea of kind of reconnecting these neighborhoods that have been pushed apart by the Cross Bronx is an exciting prospect that we'd like to see move forward. And Governor Hochul talked a fair bit about that in her State of the State address a couple weeks ago, and is in favor of it. She also talked about widening the Van Wyck Expressway. It's obviously one of the most congested interstates in the city. Totally redoing the Bruckner Sheridan interchange around Hunts Point. It's a very, very polluted part of the South Bronx that has, I think, the highest asthma rates in the city, and the confluence of a number of interstates in that area is part of the reason why public health in that area has really suffered. So she hopes to mitigate some of that with some changes, the governor, I mean. She also is going to make a bunch of changes to the Kew Gardens interchange, where the Van Wyck meets the Grand Central, meets Union Turnpike, meets Robinson. It's a real mess of an area right by Queensboro Hall. That will see a lot of changes over the course of the year, possibly into next year. So a number of big projects that could see significant changes around the city as a result of this federal funding. And those are 5 things that Governor Hochul talked about either in her State of the State directly or in her briefing book. So we know they're on the priority list. There's about $1.9 billion for bridges. It's a major need across the state, but most of this, I think, at least in the city, will go towards either maintenance or replacement of existing bridges. There aren't any big ticket items that I know of, like the Kosciuszko Bridge that was, had that big expansion recently, or the Bayonne Bridge, which was completely redone. I don't think there's anything that's on the agenda right now in the city that will have major changes as a result of the federal funding. Mostly will just go to state of good repair type items. There's also nearly $10 billion for transit. This is both for operating funds for transit agencies around the state and for capital projects as well. I think the MTA said that they would get about $3.5 billion in new funding over what they're already getting, which is great. Obviously, the MTA has had a really difficult time because they're so reliant on fares to fund their operating budget, and with subway ridership being half to even less than half of what it used to be during the pandemic, it's been a major issue for MTA's bottom line. Funding that came through the COVID relief packages was super helpful, as is the infrastructure bill to move some of their capital projects forward. So this 9.8 is for all the transit agencies in the state, although the MTA is by far and away the largest and will receive by far and away the most money. The vast majority of it will go to the MTA. They have a number of upgrades and investments that kind of will go throughout the system. They want to do a number of station upgrades and improve accessibility, adding elevators, doing resiliency projects so stations aren't flooding, et cetera. They want to make investments in new cars, new train cars and buses, including the first all-electric buses. That'll see I'm sure we'll see some funding by some of the grant programs that are available in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Signals on the subway for the busiest lines and some of the commuter rail lines. This will help improve speeds so that you're going through some of the tougher areas faster, and reliability. Keeping everything in good working condition has obviously been a major sore spot, especially as we see flooding happen more frequently. And complete some of the current expansion projects like Long Island Railroad third track and East Side Access also for Long Island Railroad riders beneath Grand Central Station. But I want to highlight three big transit projects that are likely to receive a good amount of money, both directly from the state and also through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill grant programs. One is the second phase of the Second Avenue Subway expansion, which will have 3 new stations at 106th Street, 116th, and then 125, where it'll connect to the 456 and Metro North. Parts of this tunnel are already completed, have been sitting there dormant for a long time. The first expansion of the Second Avenue Subway serves about 200,000 daily riders, and this will add another 100,000 riders. Not sure of an exact completion date, but sometime toward the end of the current decade, depending on how quickly they're able to get it done. Definitely an exciting project. East Harlem, which this will connect through, is the most transit dependent neighborhood in the entire city. Something like 83 to 85%, I can't remember the exact number, of residents in East Harlem do not own automobiles. So having another subway line for them is really crucial. Penn Station Access is another exciting project. This will open 4 new Metro North stations in the East Bronx. You can see them there: Hunts Point, Parkchester, Morris Park, and Co-op City. This is on the existing line that Amtrak and Metro North uses, and will allow both residents of the East Bronx to travel directly to Penn Station in the heart of the city, or up to Westchester and into Connecticut with a 1-seat ride. Another exciting project is the Interborough Express. And this is very, I got a toot RPA's horn here. This is a project that we've been advocating for since the mid-90s. It uses an existing freight rail line that extends from Bay Ridge up through Astoria, and can kind of give a non-Manhattan centric new rail line to parts of the city that are lacking many transportation options. And the lovely thing about this project is that it would connect 17 different subway lines along its way. It uses existing rail, so it's much cheaper than building something from scratch. Could have up to 24 new stations and as many as 80,000 daily riders. This is our RPA's original plan, the Triborough line, which extended up into the Bronx using the same tracks as Penn Station Access. So it was great that Governor Hochul kind of said in her State of the State that she was excited about the project and going to move it forward. Happy to take questions about this project. The state's sort of commitment to it to start the environmental review is very new. I don't think this was on anyone's radar as a project that could get moved forward in the next couple of years, even 6 months ago. So we're thrilled that this, at least part of it, from Bay Ridge up to Jackson Heights is moving forward. There's $685 million for the state's airports. The one priority that's been announced by the state since the passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill was the expansion of Terminal 4 at JFK. It's a $1.5 billion project that I think the Port Authority is excited to get underway fairly soon. This is a rendering that you're looking at here of new part of the terminal, adding 10 new gates, new check-in and departure procedures, and a big change to JFK's busiest terminal, part of a $15 billion redevelopment plan for JFK that will take over a decade. The airports do not rely on federal funding the same way transit and highways do. Most of the funding for this will come from fees that the Port Authority collects from passengers, from their commercial tenants and the airlines themselves. So 685 million, while it sounds like a lot, is really kind of a drop in the bucket in terms of the Port Authority's plans for the region's airports. What hasn't been on the table that has gotten a lot of press is the possibility of doing an air train to LaGuardia. That is on kind of permanent hiatus at the moment. And I haven't heard any sort of connection between the bipartisan infrastructure bill and that project. Maybe more to come on that, but so far not so much. There's over $2.5 billion for water infrastructure. The state will probably send most of this money directly to municipalities, but the governor did indicate a few things that she wanted to spend some of this money on, including wetlands protection. That's Jamaica Bay that you're looking at in the photo. Safeguarding water resources or water sources. She mentioned specifically some of Long Island's water supplies, which are somewhat at risk in changing climate. Also combating algal blooms around the state. All have sort of been, in terms of getting safe, clean water for folks to drink on a daily basis. All are very important initiatives that the state has indicated that they want to spend some of this $2.5 billion on. They're also getting about $800 million for broadband, and the governor in her State of the State announced that it would be part of a over $1 billion effort, which has a number of components. I think that the pandemic really highlighted how necessary broadband infrastructure is for, just having the ability to do virtual learning for students, to work from home. And the access to broadband is very inequitable across the state. Low income and communities of color do not have the same access of wealthier areas. And there's not enough competition for broadband either. A third of New Yorkers only have one provider that can provide the type of broadband speeds to do a Zoom like this. And that's just, with no competition, it de-incentivizes companies from being competitive with their rates. So that's something that the state wants to work on as well. They also want to, I think interestingly, want to provide subsidies for low-income households, which is great, and also want to map access, speed, and reliability. They claim will be the first comprehensive map of any state in the union of broadband speeds and access. One other thing that I wanted to mention, this is not directly to New York State, but Amtrak will be receiving $30 billion to upgrade a number of their assets across the Northeast Corridor, which stretches from, if you've ever taken Amtrak down to Washington, D.C. or up to Boston, that's the Northeast Corridor. It's by far and away Amtrak's busiest route, but it has a number of bridges and tunnels and other parts of track that are well over 100 years old and in desperate need of replacement. The busiest part of the Northeast Corridor stretches from Newark Penn Station to New York Penn Station. And there are a number of projects that are collectively called the Gateway Program, which are very, very likely to see funding from the $30 billion that Amtrak is receiving and a number of other sources in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. The first two pieces of the project are the Portal North Bridge over the Hackensack River in New Jersey, which is a 111 years old bridge that needs to be repaired. It swings open and closed for boats, but often doesn't close correctly and needs to be hammered back into place by an Amtrak worker with a sledgehammer. Not a very effective way for a bridge that sees 450 trains daily pre-pandemic. And the other part is the Hudson Tunnel project, which I'll go into in a little more detail here. Right now, there's one rail tunnel that for heavy rail that Amtrak and New Jersey Transit use under the Hudson River. It's 111 years old as well. It was really badly damaged by Hurricane Sandy, flooded pretty badly, and the salt water's been eating away at the concrete inside the tunnel. So it's been undergoing extensive maintenance since Sandy, but it really needs to be shut down a tube at a time for a complete rehab. Combined with the other gateway program improvements, it'll double capacity between Newark and New York, which is really crucial for future growth. And it will create over 70,000 jobs and over 19 billion in economic development. We expect the new tunnel, which is the main part of this project, a new tunnel that will also have 2 tracks like the existing tunnel, to be built in about 8 years from now. And then they will close the existing tunnel for the complete rehab, which will take about 1.5 years per track. So things will be fully complete by about 2032. That's a really crucial project for the region, because otherwise transport to and between New York and New Jersey under or over the Hudson would be extremely difficult. There's also the potential to rehabilitate the existing part of Penn Station underneath Madison Square Garden and 2 Penn Plaza, and expand Penn Station likely to the south. Not necessarily, but that's the most likely option. That's also necessary for increasing capacity. I could spend an hour talking about this project alone, because it's a fairly complicated one. But there's sort of 3 things that are going on simultaneously around Penn Station: a general project plan to sort of get the project started, rehabbing the existing part of the station, and building the expansion, all sort of happening simultaneously and on parallel tracks. It's a complicated project. The MTA did release some renderings of what they see the rehab of Penn Station looking like. This would be a new central train hall, sort of in between MSG to the right and 2 Penn Plaza to the left, looking to the south, trying to open up the station to light and make it more easily accessible from the street level, make it easier to navigate, unify signage between the MTA, both the Long Island Railroad and Metro North, using it, Amtrak and NJ Transit, so that it's not so disjointed as it is right now, and claustrophobic for people to use. Number of other smaller things that are also in the bill. There are some environmental projects that we'll see funding as a result of the bipartisan infrastructure bill. A lot of remediation projects and taking care of Superfund sites and so forth. The power grid will see a major investment. Obviously, Texas, the failure in Texas last year received, a lot of national news, but there are issues across the country with the power grid, so a lot of money will go towards updating that, and a number of other things as we deal with sea level rise and resiliency here in New York City that are important. And that's pretty much what I have. I mean, it's a complicated bill. There's a lot in there, but I'd be happy to talk about any of these projects in more detail and take any other questions that you might have.
Well, that's great, Brian. Thank you so much for this very involved overview, and it seems very involved to me. There are a couple of questions, and I think some more are going to come in. I'm not sure if this one has been totally answered yet. Is there anything there for the East Side Resiliency Project or things like that, do you think? You mentioned something about this. Is that?
Yeah, Not a ton. There's some money for resiliency, but things like the Army Corps of Engineers was in the last slide that I showed. They had been studying a number of during the Trump administration, they had been studying a number of contingency plans for sea level rise around New York Harbor, both and the impacts on the Jersey coast and up the Long Island coast. That study was halted by the Trump administration. I think it will, if it hasn't already continued, there's certainly enough funding to bring that study back on. East Side resiliency, I think, is more a question for the Adams administration, though, than anything that's directly in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. But some of that money could come back to the city to continue that project in the not too distant future. So yes, but not a ton. There's still going to have to be a major investment from both the state and the city to make that project happen, I think.
Okay, another question is, could you speak more about the above ground rail plan? Is this to be an on ground or elevated line?
So it's on the ground. It's actually kind of semi-subterranean, the same way certain subway lines, if you've ridden, you know that they have the walls on either side of you. So you're basically like 1 story below ground. For the most part, the Bay Ridge line, which is the line that's being used for the Interborough Express project, is in that format. So it's sort of halfway dug out, but you can look up and it's not covered. They're looking at a number of different ways that they may do this. It might be a rail project. It could be a bus project or light rail. But you kind of feel the same way. I don't know if you've been on the queue south of Prospect Park is the thing that's jumping to mind, where it's open to the sky, but you're kind of sitting 1 story down. That's the majority of the line, but it does fluctuate a little bit over the 14 miles that Governor Hochul said she wanted to look into. But so, the good thing, the tracks are already there. It's used by about 1 to 3 freight trains daily. So there is freight on the line right now. So passenger service would have to be commingled with the existing freight service. But, this is something that most cities major cities around the world do regularly. And it's an exciting project. I mean, just consider, if you lived in Jackson Heights and you went to Brooklyn College for school, right now you have to go through Manhattan in order to get there. It's about a 75-minute trip. On this line, if it was available, it would cut that commute essentially in half and allow you to get between those 2 places in about 35 to 40 minutes. So that's why it's exciting. It just really connects a lot of areas of Brooklyn and Queens that are either not served by public transit at all, like parts of Canarsie and East New York, Mass, parts of Ridgewood and Glendale also are in that boat, and just connects so many subway lines that will be useful for people to get to their destinations a lot more easily. Yes. Triborough.
Go on. If you're reading the questions, go right ahead.
The same idea. We suggested Triborough. It was an RPA proposal back in 1996, and one that we've sort of had on the back burner for 2.5 decades now. The only difference is that the Interborough Express is the MTA and the governor's office only committed to doing 2/3 of the Triborough proposal from Bay Ridge up to Jackson Heights. The original Triborough proposal continued the line to two stops in Astoria and then into the Bronx, using the same 4 new stops that would be part of the Penn Station Access project. So the MTA wants to get Penn Station Access up and running before they commit to extending the Triborough or the Interborough Express into the Bronx. It's something that might be on the table in the future if there's enough capacity. on the Hellgate Bridge, which is the only rail connection between Queens and the Bronx. It's unclear if it'll work now as it stands. Leslie asked about if there's anything for roads, especially connecting the city with New Jersey. Not that I'm aware of. No new bridges or tunnels that would have additional road capacity. I think the one thing that New Jersey is talking about that I've seen some articles about recently is sort of rehabbing its entrances of the on-ramps to the Hudson Tunnel, or sorry, the Holland Tunnel on the New Jersey side of things, which is being met with some local opposition in Jersey City, but nothing on the New York side that would add any trans-Hudson capacity. Kara, what is a projected ETA for the Interborough Express? Unclear at this point. We expect they're just starting the environmental review process, which we anticipate will take about 2 years to do. Once they do that, they should have a better sense of the timing for it. Given that they only need to create stations and don't need to build the actual rail in all likelihood, I could see it being as soon as 2026, 2027, but probably not any sooner than that. Timetables and lines of responsibility. I'm not sure exactly what Gladys is referring to. Oh, in terms of just, I'm not sure exactly what Gladys is referring to in her.
Can you unmute yourself, or maybe I can unmute you? I know you always have a lot to say. Do you know how to unmute yourself? I guess not. I don't know how I can do that.
Well, while we're waiting for that, I'll answer Natalie's question real quick. Yeah, the Interborough Triborough would be part of the MTA system. It might feel a bit more like a Long Island Railroad train than something that's part of the subway system. And so there's questions exactly how much it would cost, whether it would provide free transfers to the subway or not. That's all to come. But yeah, it would be part of the MTA system. So, it should have very direct connections to the 17 subway lines that it would overlap with, and the Long Island Railroad as well on the Atlantic branch.
Okay, I thought I had unmuted Gladys, but maybe Gladys, are you finished? I guess she's muted herself again. Okay, continue with whomever, whatever was next. Is there any other questions there? Is the goal?
Mary has a question about electrification of buses. Yeah, it would be done with batteries. The charging station would be done at the terminals where buses, sit regularly when they're not in use, and then they would be battery powered through the duration of their trip. I don't know of any bus routes that would need an overhead power line. That's certainly a different way to electrify buses, but that's not what I think is on the table here. Dorothy mentioned about OmniPay. Yes, absolutely. Interborough would have OmniPay as part of the MTA system, definitely.
Okay. I'm going to read these questions because I see I think you're overwhelmed with everything here. So
no, there's just two more here. So
okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think to Chris's question on the Interborough, I would guess that they would be able to do the entirety of the 14 miles all at one time, but that's not necessarily the case. It might be in phases, if they encounter issues with the construction of what they would need to do to prepare it for passenger service, or the stations themselves. You may see that if certain stations are not ready to be open on day one, they may skip those stations while construction continues. So I think there's a number of different ways that could go, but I would guess that it would be fairly close to all at once. And then Nancy's question, is the Hudson Tunnel a third tunnel between New York and New Jersey, and where will it be? It is the second rail tunnel for heavy rail that Amtrak would use. It's basically parallel to the existing one. So it would connect to the existing Penn Station and then go under the Hudson River and under the Palisades and come out and connect with Secaucus Junction would be the first station on the New Jersey side of things. So it's basically right now we have one rail tunnel, and that's all the rail traffic that all the NJ Transit trains and all the Amtrak trains that go under the Hudson use that tunnel. That tunnel has 2 tubes inside of it. And so we'd be building a second tunnel with 2 additional tubes. So four rail lines in total once the Hudson Tunnel project is completed. The Q question, the Q train timing is a little unclear. I think could be anywhere between 2028 I've seen to 2030. The biggest obstacle is getting the stations complete, because it does involve some eminent domain of parcels on the ground level around the station. That was the biggest hurdle for the expansion of the Q train up to 96th Street. Was the above ground stations more so. I mean, the tunneling is complicated too, and all of these projects have significant issues, which is why they're so expensive and take so long. But the eminent domain parts of the project, because they often face litigation that can drag on for years, is the most difficult part of the process. And Gladys's question, what role will RPA play? I mean, we don't have a formal role with most of these projects. We will continue to advocate for them until they are completed. You know, we're not a transit agency, so we don't, and we're not an engineering firm, so we don't do anything beyond look at whether or not we think they're feasible and what their impacts would be economically for the long-term health and sustainability of the region. But you know, when we have projects like the Gateway program and like Triborough that we think are game changers that will be really positive for a number of people, we will advocate for them until they actually get done. And some of these do take decades, if not longer, to complete. So we will continue to work on them until they actually happen.
Well, I have a couple of questions, and I'm not going to type them in because I can ask you directly. I'm not sure if you discussed this before. I thought there was some kind of plan to connect Grand Central with Penn Station. Is that true? Did you discuss that?
It's not. It's a concept that's been floated before. You know, basically doing. You know, the idea would be that if you got on a train in Newark, for example, you could ride it straight to Penn Station and then continue to Grand Central and maybe go up the Hudson to Albany or into Connecticut or to Long Island from, Long Island as well once Seaside Access opens. It's something that's been studied by the agencies, but there are no current plans to do that right now. In general, the agencies did not feel like it was particularly feasible. Penn Station, unfortunately, has a lot of limitations, even more so than Grand Central, with how the current tracks and platforms are configured, and it's really boxed in by all the subways that run perpendicular to the tracks there. So it's a very tricky place to expand tracks in and out of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would think so. It would be nice though if you could catch trains, the Metro North at Penn Station, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen.
Nothing on the table right now.
Okay, the other question, I thought at one time the Long Island Railroad was going to develop how can I say this, a way of going north from the Atlantic Avenue station. At the moment, I don't know how familiar you are with this. at Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn, you can only go to the southern part of Long Island. You can't really, there's a way maybe of transferring to the Northern Railroad. And I thought they were going to somehow try to connect those lines. Is that part of that at all?
No, nothing that I know of. I mean, to get like on the Port Washington branch, for example, from Atlantic Terminal, you would need to go to Jamaica and then transfer to Woodside and then go up from there, which is a tricky, or going to Grand Central, and then back out once East Side Access opens.
Yes, and I have to do that, unfortunately, when I visit a friend in Port Washington. So it is.
Yeah.
I want it done. Okay, and
Yeah, nothing on the table for that either, unfortunately.
And a final question, which might not be involved with this, but I do know that the subways, of course, have several problems. But one of the biggest problems in the outer boroughs, the elevators to the trains, which are above ground, never work. Never. And I know that's been a really big issue, that a lot of these people over there have no way of getting to their trains on the upper level. Is any of that being considered for?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. And there's a specific grant in the bipartisan infrastructure deal that is specifically for accessibility. So the MTA will be able to access a fair amount of that funding. I would think they would benefit by far and away the most out of any transit agency in the country. Their current capital plan, which doesn't have the funding it needs to get fully completed, but there are 120 stations that will get new elevators, and certainly maintenance is a major issue, as you highlighted, that I think should also improve with the influx of funding through the bipartisan infrastructure deal.
I just read the outer boroughs are having more, they have more people traveling on them than like the people in Manhattan, because the people from there are going to jobs where they manually labor. And it's really terrible that they can't even get to half their stations.
Yeah.
Anyway, and do you know what the timeline is on that? I know eventually is a word that people use, but
yeah, I mean, it's a 5-year capital plan that we're in the middle of now. So theoretically, it would all be the 120-ish new stations. I forget the exact number, would theoretically be done by about 2025, but I don't know if that will actually come to fruition or not. Oftentimes these projects don't get done exactly in the time frame that they're projected to. So, but it is something that I know the MTA has prioritized in their current plan.
okay. During our little discussion here, Mary Jenkins came up with another question. What ideas does RPA have for using excess office space in Manhattan?
It's a great question. I think we've advocated a lot for more flexibility in how it's being used, relaxing some of the zoning restrictions so that, conversions to residential or other uses could be easier. All those things are time and money intensive though. So there's not an easy answer for any of those. And I will admit, I'm not the person to speak with authority on office space and housing like some of my colleagues are who work on that on a more day-to-day basis. I'm mostly focused on our transportation issues.
Okay, there is one more question that has come in, and then we're going to stop this. And I think I warned you, Brian, that you could be deluged with questions. You've got to stop someplace. And this is from Dorothy, who says, what is the timeline for improving internet access and speed in the area that needs, I'm sorry, I just got distracted, that needs it? And then she says, thank you for sharing tonight. These projects are exciting and inspiring. And then she says, are there any plans to sync the power lines in Queens and Brooklyn? They are often loose power.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't know anything about burying the power lines in parts of Brooklyn where they're overhead. That's just Not something I have spent any time looking at, so I can't answer that. I know the governor talked in her State of the State and briefing book about working as quickly as possible to improve internet speeds and access. It's something that's clearly been a priority since the start of the pandemic. So, you know, the influx of cash will certainly help. So I think this is something that they're doing on a as quickly as possible basis, and have a good amount of money to work as quickly as they possibly can. Yeah, not only did she mention in the State of the State, but she released the executive budget today, and there were a number of references to this program. It's called Connect All, I believe, and you know, they're going to be working on a number of projects related to broadband ASAP.
Okay, well, I think that's plenty. Thank you so much. This has been such an informative presentation. And I think we're going to have you back in about another year to see how it's going.
Sure, be happy to do that.
And for everyone else, I thank you for coming. I remember that next month we're going to have a really good program. It's going to be on Tuesday, February 15th. We're going to have a great speaker talking on critical race theory, which seems to be the new in topic. So without further ado, thank you once again, Brian, and thank you all for coming. Take care.
My pleasure. Have a good evening.